Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be your storyteller today. Many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain guide you into the story. Most people see beauty in sunsets, in mountains, in fields of wildflowers. I see it in rust. I see it in broken windows, in concrete walls stained with years of rain, in the skeletal remains of forgotten factories. My name is Chloe, and I am a photographer of abandoned places. I find a strange, haunting beauty in the things the world has left behind, in the quiet, slow process of nature reclaiming what was once man-made. It is a silent, lonely, and deeply peaceful passion. My primary tool is not a traditional camera, but a drone, a beautiful, high-end piece of technology I saved up for over a year to buy. It's my remote eye, my ticket to perspectives that are otherwise impossible. It allows me to soar over collapsing roofs, to peer into high, inaccessible windows, and to drift silently through vast, empty turbine halls. It is a way for me to explore these dangerous, unstable places from a position of absolute safety and control, 100 feet away. My process has become a ritual. I spend my weekdays researching, scouring old maps and online forums for urban explorers, looking for my next subject. I look for places with a story, abandoned power plants, derelict hospitals, forgotten industrial parks on the edge of the city. Then, on a Saturday or Sunday morning, I drive out to the location, find a discreet place to park, and I begin my flight. It is a form of meditation for me. The drone, which I've nicknamed Icarus, is an extension of my own body. Through the high-definition feed on my controller's screen, I am no longer a woman standing on the edge of a field. I am a bird. I can glide effortlessly over a landscape of decay, choreographing beautiful, sweeping shots, capturing the interplay of light and shadow on peeling paint and rusted metal. It is a feeling of complete and utter freedom, of seeing the world in a way no one else can. There is a profound sense of peace in these abandoned places. They are free from the noise and the rush of the human world. The only sounds are the wind, whistling through broken panes of glass, and the gentle, high-pitched whir of my drone's propellers. It is a quiet that is full of history. Every silent, empty room a testament to the lives and the work that once filled it. My photographs are an attempt to capture that silence, to document that history. This hobby is my escape. My day job is, in a busy, open-plan office, a world of constant noise, collaboration, and deadlines. My weekends with my drone are the antidote. They are a time of pure, solitary focus, where the only person I have to answer to is myself, and the only goal is to capture a single, perfect image. It is a world that I am in complete and total control of, from the angle of the shot to the speed of the flight. I always take safety precautions. I fly in the early morning when these places are most likely to be deserted. I never enter the structures themselves. They are often dangerously unstable. My drone is my proxy, my brave little explorer that goes where I cannot. This distance is my shield. It allows me to experience the thrill of exploration without any of the physical risk. I am an observer, separated from my subject by 100 feet of air. My favorite location, the one I return to again and again, is the old Stirling power plant. It's a massive, sprawling complex of brick buildings and towering smokestacks that was decommissioned in the 1980s. It is a cathedral of decay, a beautiful industrial ruin that offers an endless variety of textures and compositions. I have spent hours flying my drone through its empty, cavernous halls. capturing the haunting beauty of its slow collapse. I post my finished photographs on a niche online gallery under a pseudonym. The feedback is always positive, a small community, of fellow artists who appreciate the strange beauty I find in these forgotten places. But the community aspect is secondary. For me, the true joy is in the process itself. The research, the flight, the quiet, solitary hours spent editing the footage, searching for that one perfect, haunting frame. My world is one of control, of distance, of a carefully curated and safe exploration of the forbidden. I am the watcher, the observer, the eye in the sky, and the subjects of my photography are silent, inanimate, and empty. I have always believed this to be true, but I was about to discover that one of my favorite, most empty locations was not empty at all, and the observer, I would soon learn, was also being observed. The editing process is where the true discovery happens. Back in the quiet of my small apartment, with a large cup of coffee, I sift through hours of high-resolution footage. It is a slow, meditative process. I glide through the silent, empty spaces I have captured, looking for the perfect moment. A shaft of light hitting a pile of rubble just right, the haunting silhouette of a broken machine, the intricate, peeling layers of old paint on a forgotten wall. It is a treasure hunt, and the treasures are moments of quiet, decaying beauty. There is a story in every abandoned place, and my drone is my tool for reading it. The placement of a rusted-out chair, the scattered papers on an office floor, the way the vines have crept through a specific broken window. These are all clues. They are the final, fading sentences in the story of the people who once worked here. My photographs are an attempt to preserve that story before it is completely erased by time and the elements. The Stirling power plant, in particular, felt like an epic novel. Each building was a different chapter. The massive turbine hall, with its cavernous ceilings and silent, colossal machines, was a chapter about immense power and industry. The small, forgotten administrative offices, with their scattered files and overturned chairs, were a chapter about the human element, the everyday lives that had once powered this giant beast of a place. I felt a profound respect for these locations. I was a guest, a visitor from another time, and I made sure my presence was as unobtrusive as possible. My drone was quiet, its footprint non-existent. I took nothing but pictures, and I left nothing but the faint hum of my propellers, which was quickly swallowed by the silence. It was a perfect, no-impact form of exploration, allowing me to witness these places without disturbing their long, quiet slumber. My confidence in my own safety was absolute. The greatest danger I faced was a sudden gust of wind or a technical malfunction with the drone itself. The subjects of my work were inanimate, unmoving. They were buildings, not people. They held no threat. My hobby was a one-way interaction. I observed, I captured, and I left. The idea that something in these abandoned places could observe me back was not just unlikely, it was, in my mind, nonsensical. This feeling of control was central to the appeal. My daily life was often a series of compromises and collaborations, of answering to clients and managers. But out here, with my drone, I was the sole director. I chose the location, I choreographed the flight path, I framed the shot. The entire process, from research to final edited photograph, was a product of my own vision and my own will. It was a small kingdom where I was the absolute ruler. I had created a perfect bubble for myself, a way to experience the thrill of trespassing and the beauty of decay without any of the associated risks. The drone was my avatar, my proxy, my suit of armor. I could send it into the most dangerous, unstable environments, while I remained perfectly safe, sometimes hundreds of feet away, watching the world through its unblinking, high-resolution eye. This particular Saturday, my plan was to do a full, detailed survey of the power plant's highest smokestack, a place I had never been able to get a clear shot of before. The weather was perfect, with clear skies and almost no wind. It was an ideal day for flying. I packed my gear, my mind already filled with the images I hoped to capture, the beautiful geometric patterns of the decaying brickwork against the pale morning sky. I felt a familiar thrill of anticipation as I drove out to the plant. It was the thrill of the explorer, the archaeologist, about to uncover a new, unseen part of a familiar ruin. I had no reason to believe this flight would be any different from the dozens I had conducted here before. It was a routine operation, in a familiar, empty, and blessedly silent location. My assumptions were about to be systematically, terrifyingly dismantled. I had built my passion on the belief that I was observing empty spaces. But empty spaces are a fiction. Nature abhors a vacuum, and sometimes so does something else. I was about to learn that even in the most forgotten, derelict corners of the world, you are never truly alone. And sometimes, when you are staring into the abyss through a camera lens, the abyss finds a way to stare back. The flight that morning was everything I had hoped it would be. The air was still and clear, allowing Icarus to ascend with a smooth, steady grace. I parked at my usual spot, a small gravel clearing shielded from the main road by a thick stand of pine trees. From here, I had a perfect line of sight to the entire power plant complex. I went through my pre-flight checklist, calibrated the drone's compass, and sent it soaring into the pale blue sky. The world unfolded beneath its lens, a beautiful tapestry of decay. I spent the first hour performing wide, sweeping passes over the entire complex, capturing the grand, architectural scale of the place. The rusted smokestacks reached for the sky like skeletal fingers, their brickwork a stunning mosaic of red and brown. The roofs of the turbine halls were vast, empty plains of gravel and tar, dotted with skylights that were now just dark, gaping holes. It was a landscape of magnificent ruin, and I felt the familiar thrill of capturing its haunting beauty. My main objective for the day was the Central Administrative Building, a 5-story brick structure that was less decayed than the others, its windows mostly intact. I had always been drawn to this building, to the silent, empty offices where hundreds of people had once spent their lives. I maneuvered the drone closer, its camera tilting down to peer into the darkened, glass-paned windows, one by one, like a curious ghost. The drone was a silent, delicate instrument. I flew it with a practiced, gentle touch on the controls, making it glide from window to window with an eerie, balletic grace. The high-definition feed on my controller was crystal clear. I could see the overturned desks, the scattered papers, the thick layer of dust that coated every surface. It was a perfect, still-life portrait of a world that had ended abruptly, its occupants having simply vanished. After capturing hours of footage, my drone's battery indicator began to flash, a warning. The flight was over. I guided Icarus back to my position, performing a perfect, soft landing in its carrying case. I packed up my gear, my mind already buzzing with the images I had captured, eager to get home and begin the editing process. The morning had been a complete success, a perfect execution of my solitary, artistic ritual. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction and peace. Back in my apartment, I poured myself a large cup of coffee and began the meticulous process of reviewing the footage. This was where the real work began, sifting through the raw data to find the moments of unexpected beauty. I scrubbed through the video, my eyes scanning for the perfect composition, the perfect play of light and shadow. The footage was beautiful, even better than I had hoped. The morning light had been perfect. I was focused on a slow, panning shot across the face of the administrative building, admiring the way the light caught the texture of the old brick. My drone was moving past a row of high, darkened windows on the 4th floor. It was a simple, establishing shot. But as I watched, my eye caught something, a flicker of movement in one of the windows. It was so fast, so subtle, that I wasn't even sure I had seen it. I paused the video and scrubbed back, frame by frame. There, in the deep shadow of one of the window frames, something had moved. It was a pale, indistinct blur, there in one frame and gone in the next. My first thought was that it was a bird that had been roosting on the ledge and had been startled by the drone's approach. It was a perfectly logical, simple, and reassuring explanation. But my curiosity got the better of me. I zoomed in on the image, pushing the digital magnification to its absolute limit. The image began to pixelate, to break down into a noisy, grainy mess. But even through the digital noise, the shape was wrong for a bird. It was not a flutter of wings. It was a pale, vertical shape, and it seemed to pull back, to retreat from the window into the deeper darkness of the room behind it. I stared at the pixelated blur, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. It looked for a fleeting, impossible moment, like a hand, or a face, a pale human face, peeking out from the shadows before pulling back in alarm. The thought was absurd. The building was derelict, unsafe. Who would be hiding on the 4th floor of a ruined power plant? It had to be a trick of the light, my mind creating patterns out of the digital noise. A case of pareidolia. It had to be. I spent the next hour obsessing over those 3 grainy frames of video. I applied different filters, adjusted the contrast, sharpened the image until it was a harsh, noisy mess. But the shape remained stubbornly, frustratingly ambiguous. It could have been anything. A piece of peeling paint catching the light, a plastic bag caught on a piece of broken furniture, fluttering in a draft, a reflection of a cloud in the grimy glass. There were a dozen logical explanations. The most plausible and most unsettling real-world explanation was that I had seen a person. A squatter, perhaps, or a fellow urban explorer who, unlike me, was foolish enough to venture inside the decaying structure. The thought made me feel a pang of guilt. I had inadvertently spied on someone, my drone a peeping Tom in their temporary, illegal home. If that were the case, they had every right to hide from my camera's intrusive gaze. This explanation brought a strange sort of comfort. A squatter was a known quantity, a person with understandable, if desperate, motivations. It would mean the plant was not as empty as I had thought, which was a disappointment. But it was not a horror. It was a simple, sad reality of the modern world. I decided that this was the most likely answer. I had startled a homeless person, and that was the end of it. I made a mental note to be more careful in the future, to be more respectful of the possibility that I was not entirely alone in these forgotten places. I felt a renewed sense of the importance of keeping my distance, of observing from afar. My drone was a tool for photography, not for surveillance of the unfortunate. I felt a bit ashamed of my own morbid curiosity in zooming in on the image and trying to see the person who clearly did not want to be seen. With a new resolve, I deleted the section of the video containing the anomaly. It was a gesture of respect, for the privacy of the person I had perhaps intruded upon. I would not use their image in my art. I would pretend I had never seen it. I focused on the rest of the footage, on the beautiful, empty, and blessedly motionless shots of the decaying architecture. I would concentrate on the beauty, not the blur. The rest of my editing process was peaceful. I found several stunning shots of the smokestacks against the morning sky and a beautiful, abstract close-up of rusted machinery. I processed the images, adjusting the colors and tones, losing myself in the familiar, comforting process of my craft. The memory of the face in the window began to fade, a strange, forgettable anecdote in an otherwise successful day of photography. By the time I had finished my work, I had almost entirely convinced myself that I had seen nothing at all. It was a trick of the light. My mind, so attuned to looking for human elements in my photographs, the stories, the history, had simply created one where none existed. It was a testament to the power of my own imagination, nothing more. The explanation was neat, tidy, and it allowed me to keep my sanctuary of the power plant pure and empty. I posted my new photos to my online gallery, and the positive comments began to roll in. The small, validating rush of praise from my fellow artists was enough to push the last vestiges of the unsettling memory from my mind. The world was back to normal. I was the observer, and my subjects were the beautiful, silent, and empty ruins I so loved to explore. But that night, as I was trying to fall asleep, the image of the pixelated blur returned to my mind's eye. The way it had moved, the way it had pulled back into the darkness. It was not the flutter of a bird. It was the movement of something that was aware, something that was hiding. The feeling of being an intruder returned, but it was now mingled with a new, colder feeling. The feeling of having been seen by something that did not want to be seen. I eventually drifted off to sleep, but my dreams were troubled. I dreamt of dark, empty windows, and of pale faces looking out at me from the shadows. I was the one flying, my body soaring over the abandoned plant, and from every window, a pair of eyes would watch my approach. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding, the feeling of being observed still clinging to me like a shroud. It was a feeling that I was about to become much more familiar with. A full week passed, and the memory of the face in the window softened, becoming just a strange, unresolved footnote to an otherwise successful photo shoot. I had successfully convinced myself that it was nothing, a product of my own imagination. And yet, the Stirling power plant, which had once been a source of calm inspiration, now held a new, magnetic pull. My curiosity, that dangerous and powerful engine, was stronger than my lingering, half-forgotten fear. I had to go back. I told myself it was for purely photographic reasons. There were angles I had missed, shots I still wanted to get. But I knew, on a deeper level, that I was not just going back for the pictures. I was going back to see if the anomaly would repeat itself. I was returning to the scene of the crime, the scene of my own brief, unsettling delusion, to prove to myself that it had been nothing more than a trick of the light. I needed to reclaim the space as my own empty, silent sanctuary. The following Saturday morning, I found myself back in my usual parking spot, the familiar hulking shapes of the power plant looming in the distance. The air was different this time, charged with a new sense of anticipation. I was not the same calm, detached observer I had been a week ago. I was a woman with a mission to debunk my own fears, to prove my own sanity. I launched Icarus into the sky, my hand steady on the controls, my heart beating a little faster than usual. My plan was to start with a high-altitude pass, to get a full, comprehensive overview of the entire complex before moving in for closer shots. It was a standard surveying technique, but today it also felt like a cautious military reconnaissance mission. I was scanning my territory, looking for any sign of another presence, any anomaly that would confirm my fears, or hopefully, allay them completely. The drone climbed, the world shrinking below it. From 500 feet up, the power plant looked like a beautiful, intricate scale model, a maze of decaying brick and rusting metal. I panned the camera slowly, my eyes scanning the high-definition feed on my screen. Everything looked exactly as it should. The same broken windows, the same collapsed roofs, the same silent, empty courtyards. I felt a wave of relief begin to wash over me. It had been nothing. I was just being foolish. And then I saw it. It was on the vast, flat, gravel-covered roof of the main turbine hall, a building I had flown over a dozen times before. Against the dark gray of the rooftop, something stood out with a stark, brutal clarity. It was a series of massive white letters, freshly painted. They were crude, hurried, but perfectly legible from my high vantage point. It was a message that could only be read from the sky. My blood ran cold. I maneuvered the drone, closer, my hands suddenly slick with sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. The letters were huge, each one at least 10 feet high. They had been painted with a stark, white, industrial paint, the kind used for road markings. And the message they spelled out was simple, direct, and aimed at the only person in the world who could possibly be reading it at that moment. It was aimed at me. It read, "I see you." 3 simple words, 3 words that completely and utterly destroyed my world. My rationalizations, my theories about light and shadow, my dismissal of the face in the window. It all evaporated in an instant, replaced by the single, horrifying, and undeniable truth. Someone had been in that window. They had seen my drone. And they had left me this message. A response. A confirmation. I stared at the screen, at the stark white letters on the gray roof, and I felt a terror so profound it was almost paralyzing. He knew. He knew I had been there last week. He knew I was watching. And he knew that I would come back. He had painted this message for me, a personal, one-to-one communication across the vast empty space. The anonymity of my hobby, my shield, of distance was a complete and total illusion. This was no longer a passive observation. This was a conversation. And he had just spoken his first words. The power dynamic had been violently, irrevocably inverted. I was not the observer. I was the one being observed, the one being responded to. The hunter had become the hunted. And the person hunting me was intelligent, patient, and had just proven that he knew exactly who he was playing this terrible game with. My first instinct was to flee. I jammed the control stick on my remote, sending Icarus soaring backwards, away from the terrifying message. The drone's camera feed tilted wildly, the image of the power plant becoming a dizzying, chaotic blur. I was no longer a calm, methodical photographer. I was a panicked pilot, trying to get my scout out of enemy territory as fast as its propellers could carry it. The only thought in my head was escape. As the drone raced back towards my position, I scanned the footage on the screen, my eyes frantically searching the landscape below. Every shadow seemed to hold a figure. Every broken window was an eye watching my drone's flight. The vast, empty complex, which had once been a source of peaceful beauty, was now a hostile, menacing landscape. It was his territory, and I had trespassed, and now he was letting me know I had been caught. I didn't wait for the drone to land gracefully. I brought it in fast, cutting the motors when it was a few feet off the ground and letting it clatter into the tall grass beside my car. I didn't care about damaging it. My only concern was getting away from this place. I threw the drone and the controller into the back seat, my movements clumsy and panicked. I jumped into the driver's seat and peeled out of the gravel clearing, my tires spitting rocks behind me. The drive home was a blur of pure adrenaline. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a rusted, unmarked van chasing me. Every car behind me was a potential threat. Every person I saw on the street was him. The message, "I see you," was a brand on my mind, a declaration that had shattered my sense of safety. He had seen my drone. Had he seen my car? Had he seen me? Back in the supposed safety of my apartment, I locked the door and leaned against it, my body trembling. I had escaped the power plant, but I had not escaped him. He had proven that he could communicate with me, that he could reach me even when I was 100 feet in the air. The physical distance that I had believed was my shield was meaningless. He had turned my own technology, my own perspective, into a weapon against me. I couldn't stop thinking about the logistics of it. He must have seen my drone last week. He must have spent the past week planning his response. He had acquired white paint. He had climbed onto the roof of a dangerous, decaying building. And he had painted a message for an audience of one, a message he was not even sure I would ever return to see. The sheer obsessive patience of it was what terrified me the most. Who was this person? A security guard? A squatter with a bizarre sense of humor? Or someone else? Someone who, like me, was drawn to these abandoned places, but for a much darker reason. Was he a protector of this space, trying to scare me away? Or was he a predator who had just found a new, interesting prey to toy with? The questions were a swarm of angry hornets in my head, and I had no answers. That night, my apartment did not feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a cage. I kept the blinds drawn, but the feeling of being watched was a constant, prickling presence at the back of my neck. I kept imagining a drone, his drone, hovering outside my window in the darkness, its camera lens a single, unblinking eye staring in at me. The fear was no longer confined to the power plant. It had followed me home. My hobby, my passion, my one source of quiet, solitary joy had been corrupted. I couldn't imagine ever flying my drone again. The feeling of freedom, of being an unseen eye in the sky, was gone forever. Now, when I looked at the sky, I would only wonder who else was up there looking down at me. He had not just invaded my physical space. He had invaded my mental space, my creative space. He had taken my art and turned it into a weapon. The first phase of his game was over. The subtle hint, the blur in the window, had been replaced by a direct, undeniable statement. I was being watched. I was being communicated with. And the person doing it was intelligent, determined, and had just proven that he could turn my own unique perspective against me. The anonymous observer was now a known target, and I was terrified of what his next message would be. Sleep did not come that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the stark white letters painted on the gray roof. I see you. The message played on a continuous loop in my mind, a declaration of a horrifying truth I could no longer deny. My hobby, my quiet, solitary passion, had made me visible to someone, and that someone was now playing a terrifying game with me. My sense of safety, even in my own locked apartment, was a distant memory. I spent the night pacing my small living room, the city lights outside my window feeling less like a comfort and more like a million unblinking eyes. I replayed the events over and over, desperately searching for a rational explanation that wasn't a direct threat to me. Could the message have been for someone else? Another drone pilot who flew over the plant? It was possible, a thin, flimsy thread of hope that I clung to with all my might. But I knew it was a lie. The timing was too perfect. The discovery of the face in the window, and then, a week later, the message. It was a direct response. It was a conversation. He had seen me, and now he had spoken to me in the only language we shared, the language of the aerial view. My hope for a coincidence was just another form of denial, a desperate attempt to put the monster back in its cage. But the monster was out, and it knew my name, or at least my drone's presence. The next day was a Sunday, but there was no rest, for me. I was a wreck, my nerves frayed, my mind a maelstrom of fear. I kept all my blinds closed, turning my sunny apartment into a dim, claustrophobic cave. I felt like I was being hunted, and my own home was a hiding place that was no longer secure. The feeling of being watched was a constant physical presence, a weight on my shoulders that I could not shrug off. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? Someone painted a message on a roof in an abandoned building? They would ask if the message was a direct threat. I see you. Was it a threat or just a statement? In the context of my experience, it was the most terrifying thing I could imagine. But to a skeptical police officer, it would sound like graffiti, a prank. I knew, with a sinking heart, that they would not be able to help me. As night fell again, my anxiety reached a fever pitch. The darkness outside my windows was no longer just the absence of light. It was a territory, his territory. It was the space from which he had watched me, from which he had photographed me in his mind's eye. Every shadow seemed to hold his shape. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, my eyes darting towards the covered windows, waiting for a dawn that felt a lifetime away. It was close to midnight when I finally felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. My fear had worn me down. I decided to try and get some sleep. I went into my bedroom, the one room in my apartment that felt the most private, the most secure. I got into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin like a child hiding from the monsters. Under the bed, the silence of my apartment was absolute. And then I heard it. It started as a faint, high-pitched whine, almost too high for the human ear to register. It was a sound I knew intimately. It was the sound of my own drone, the sound of its 4 small propellers spinning at high speed. It was a sound that should not be here. It was a sound that belonged to the open skies over abandoned buildings, not to the quiet residential street outside my 3rd-floor apartment. The sound grew louder, closer. It was not a passing noise. It was stationary. It was hovering. It was right outside my bedroom window. My blood turned to ice. Every muscle in my body locked. I lay there, paralyzed in my bed, listening to the high-pitched electronic buzz of a drone. His drone, hovering in the darkness just a few feet from where I lay. He had followed me. The observer had become the observed. The eye in the sky was now my own. He had taken my tool, my passion, my one source of freedom, and he had turned it into a weapon against me. He was no longer a distant threat at an abandoned power plant. He was here. He was at my window. And he was letting me know, in the most direct and terrifying way possible, that he knew exactly where I slept. I lay perfectly still, my body rigid with a terror so profound, it felt like paralysis. The buzzing was a physical presence, a high-frequency vibration that seemed to seep through the glass of the window and into my bones. It was the sound of a giant, mechanical hornet hovering just outside, its unseen eye pointed directly at my room. My bedroom, my most private sanctuary, had been turned into an observation deck for my tormentor. He had found me. My mind raced with 100 frantic thoughts. Should I look? Should I peek through the blinds to try and see the drone, to see its lights? But the thought of seeing it, of confirming its physical presence, of perhaps seeing its camera lens pointed directly at me, was more than I could bear. And what if it saw me looking back? The thought was paralyzing. To be seen in my own bed, in my most vulnerable state, was a violation I could not stomach. So I did nothing. I just lay there, my eyes wide open in the darkness, my ears focused on the single terrifying sound. The buzzing was steady, confident. It was not the sound of a hobbyist taking a quick aerial shot. It was the sound of deliberate, patient surveillance. He was hovering, watching, listening. He was letting me know that the walls of my apartment were meaningless to him. He could see me whenever he wanted. The sound continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes. Every second was a new wave of terror. I imagined the camera lens, its cold, impassive glass eye, trying to peer through the gaps in my blinds. I imagined him, miles away or just down the street, his face illuminated by the glow of a controller screen, watching a live feed of the outside of my window. My home was no longer a secret. It was a target. Then, the pitch of the buzzing changed slightly. It grew higher, and then it began to fade. He was ascending, pulling away. I listened, my body still tense, as the sound grew fainter and fainter, until it was finally swallowed by the silence of the night. He was gone. The immediate threat had passed. But the silence he left behind was a new kind of horror. It was the silence of a place that had been visited, a space that had been breached. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just lay in my bed, staring at the dark window, my sense of security completely and irrevocably shattered. The power plant had been one thing. It was a remote, abandoned place. But this was my home. He had followed me. He had found me. And he had sent his own mechanical ghost to my window to let me know that my private life was now his public spectacle. The game had escalated to a level I could never have anticipated. This was no longer about a creepy message on a roof. This was active, targeted, and technologically sophisticated stalking. He had a drone, just like me. He had the skill to fly it at night, to find my specific apartment window in a building full of them. He was not just some random vandal. He was my equal, my shadow, my rival. The sun rose, but it brought no comfort. The daylight only served to illuminate the scene of the crime, my own bedroom. I felt contaminated, as if his unseen gaze had left a physical residue on everything in the room. I finally found the courage to look out the window. The street was normal, quiet. There was no sign of him, no trace of his drone. It was as if it had been a dream. But I knew it wasn't. The memory of the sound was too real. The first part of this terrible story was over. The subtle clues, the escalating messages, had all led to this. A direct, undeniable violation of my home. My paranoia was no longer paranoia. It was a rational response to a real and present danger. The observer had become the observed, and my own tools had been turned against me with a terrifying and brilliant cruelty. I was being hunted. I sat in my sunlit room, which now felt as cold and as exposed as a glass cage, and I knew that my life was forever changed. I was a target, and the man who was targeting me was intelligent, patient, and had the technology to watch me from a distance, from a place I could never reach. The question was no longer if he would make another move. The only question was when and how much closer he would get next time. The sound of the drone at my window was a declaration of war. My home, my last bastion of safety, had been breached. The days that followed were lived in a state of suffocating paranoia. I became a creature of the indoors, my world shrinking to the confines of my own apartment. Every time I heard a high-pitched sound, a passing siren, a kitchen appliance, my heart would seize with a jolt of pure terror, my body bracing for the return of that horrible electronic buzz. My first act of defense was a desperate, almost frantic one. I went to a hardware store and bought the thickest, heaviest blackout curtains I could find. I spent an entire afternoon installing them, my hands shaking as I drilled brackets into the walls. I covered every window in my apartment, plunging my home into a permanent, artificial twilight. If he was going to watch me, I would not give him a show. I would live in darkness to deny him his view. Living in a perpetual gloom was deeply unsettling. It felt as if I were in mourning for my own life, for the simple pleasure of sunlight on my skin, but the darkness also felt like a shield. It was a physical barrier between my world and his prying mechanical eye. I could not stop him from hovering outside my window, but I could, at the very least, deny him the satisfaction of seeing inside. It was a small, miserable victory, but it was the only one I had. After fortifying my home, my next step was to try once again to engage with the outside world. I had to report this. The threat was no longer a vague message on a distant roof. It was a physical presence at my home address. I walked to the local police precinct, my heart pounding, determined to make them understand the gravity of the situation. I would not be dismissed this time. I had a real, tangible event to report. I sat across from a tired, overworked detective and recounted my story for what felt like the 100th time. I told him about the power plant, the message on the roof, and finally, the drone that had hovered outside my bedroom window. I tried to keep my voice steady, to present the facts without the tremor of the terror that was consuming me. I needed him to see me as a credible witness, not a hysterical woman. He listened, his expression a mask of professional patience. When I was finished, he sighed, the same weary, dismissive sigh I was coming to know so well. "Ma'am," he said, "I understand that a buzzing sound outside your window was frightening, but what exactly do you want us to do? You didn't see the drone, you didn't see the person flying it, and it didn't cause any damage. There is no crime to investigate here." "But it was a drone," I insisted, my voice cracking. "It was the same person from the power plant. He followed me home. He's stalking me." The detective just shook his head slowly. "You don't know it was the same person. You're connecting events that have no provable link. A drone in the city is not an uncommon sight. Without a witness, a photo of the device, or a direct threat. My hands are tied. It's your word against, well, against nothing. His logic was a cold, impenetrable wall. He was right. I had no proof. The sound of the drone was as ephemeral as the face in the reflection had been. My story was a collection of strange, unsettling feelings and impossible to prove events. To him, I was just another paranoid city dweller, my senses frayed by the constant noise and stress of urban life. He took a brief report, but I knew it would just sit in a file, a testament to my own perceived instability. I left the police station feeling utterly defeated. The systems that were supposed to protect me were completely inadequate to handle a threat so modern, so elusive. My tormentor was a ghost in every sense of the word. He operated from a distance, he used untraceable methods, and he left behind no physical evidence. He had created a perfect, hermetically sealed bubble of terror around me, and no one from the outside could see in. My only remaining course of action was to retreat. I grounded myself. I packed my own drone, my beautiful Icarus, away in its case, and put it in the back of my closet. The thought of flying it now made me feel sick. My passion had become a source of profound fear. By grounding my own drone, I felt like I was severing my last connection to him, cutting the one thread that tied us together. I was hoping that if the observer stopped observing, the other observer would lose interest. For a week, my strategy seemed to work. The silence was absolute. There was no late-night buzzing at my window, no new messages painted on distant rooftops. My world was a dark, quiet, and blessedly uneventful space. By removing myself from the sky, by shuttering my windows, I had made myself invisible. I had erased myself from his view, and in response, he seemed to have vanished from my life. A fragile, tentative peace began to settle in my shuttered apartment. The blackout curtains, which had at first felt like the walls of a tomb, now felt like a suit of armor. They were my shield, my defense against his prying eye. I began to find a strange comfort in the artificial twilight of my home. The outside world, with its open skies and potential observers, was the place of danger. Inside my dark, quiet cave, I was safe. I was in control. The fear began to recede, replaced by a cautious, hopeful sense of security. I started to believe that it was over. My theory had been correct. He was an observer who was drawn to other observers. By grounding my drone, I had taken myself off his radar. I was no longer a fellow player in the game of aerial surveillance. I was just a normal person living a normal, boring life, and a normal, boring life was of no interest to him. I had made myself an uninteresting target, and he had moved on. The relief was immense, a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. I began to sleep through the night again. I ventured outside for groceries without constantly scanning the sky. The world began to feel like a safe place once more. My terror, which had been so all-consuming, now started to feel like a distant, slightly embarrassing memory. I had been frightened, but I had taken decisive action, and I had solved the problem. I had won. This newfound sense of peace was a heady, intoxicating thing. I had faced down a terrifying, technologically sophisticated stalker, and I had outsmarted him. I had understood his motives, the thrill of the chase, the game of observer, this observer, and I had ended the game by simply refusing to play. It was a victory of passivity, of strategic retreat. I had won by making myself invisible, and I was proud of my own ingenuity. I didn't even think about the power plant anymore. the memory of the message on the roof, of the face in the window, began to feel like scenes from a movie I had once seen, not events from my own life. I had successfully compartmentalized the experience, filing it away under strange and unsettling, but now resolved. My life was returning to a state of normalcy, albeit a darker, more shuttered version of it. I did not take down the blackout curtains. They were a reminder of my victory, a symbol of the defenses I had built to protect myself. They were a testament to my own strength and resourcefulness. I had been hunted, and I had successfully hidden myself from the hunter. I was safe now. The game was over, and I was the one who had written the final chapter by closing the book. But my entire victory was built on a single flawed premise, that his interest in me was tied to my hobby. I believed that his surveillance was a response to my own. I had no way of knowing that my drone flights had not been the beginning of his obsession. They had merely been the thing that had brought his already existing obsession to my attention. I had not been chosen because I was an observer. I was chosen for reasons I could not yet comprehend. He had let me have my week of peace. He had let me install my curtains, ground my drone, and settle into my new, false sense of security. He had watched me build my pathetic little fortress of darkness, and he had been patient. He was about to show me that my actions were meaningless, that my defenses were a joke. He was about to prove that his surveillance was not limited to the sky, because his goal was not just to watch me fly my drone. His goal was to watch me, and he didn't need to be in the air to do that. He had seen my car. He had seen me, and he had followed me from the power plant that first day. My little victory was an illusion he had allowed me to have. The brief, peaceful moment a cat gives a mouse before the final, terrible blow. And that blow was about to land, not at my window, but in my email inbox. My self-imposed darkness became a strange new normal. I grew accustomed to the perpetual twilight of my apartment, my eyes adjusting to the low light. The outside world, with its bright sun and open skies, felt like a foreign country. My home was my bunker, and for a full week, it felt like the safest place on earth. The silence was unbroken. The nights were free from the menacing hum of propellers. I had won. I had starved him of his subject, and he had gone away. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a time of day I no longer associated with any particular dread. It slipped quietly into my personal inbox, not my work one. The sender's address was an anonymous, encrypted jumble of characters. The subject line was empty. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. It was him. The truce was over. My peaceful, shuttered world was about to be breached again. A part of me wanted to delete it instantly, to not even engage. But I knew I couldn't. His power was in the unknown, in the threat of what he might do. To ignore his message would be to let my own fearful imagination run wild. I had to know what this new move was. I had to see what new piece he was placing on the board. With a hand that was not quite steady, I clicked the email open, my screen casting a pale glow in my dark living room. The body of the email was as empty as the subject line. There were no words, no threats, no explanations. There was only a single hyperlink, a string of blue, underlined text. It looked like a link to a private photo sharing website. It was an invitation, a doorway. And I knew that on the other side of that click was a new, carefully curated piece of horror, designed just for me. My curiosity, as always, was a traitor. I clicked the link. The web page loaded slowly, a blank screen that seemed to hang for an eternity. Then, a single image resolved itself, filling my monitor. It was a photograph. A stunningly clear, high-resolution, aerial photograph taken from a great height, looking straight down. The subject of the photo was a car, a familiar-looking dark blue sedan, parked in a small gravel clearing at the edge of a dense pine forest. It was my car. I stared at the image, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. It was my car, parked in my usual discreet spot near the Sterling power plant. The photo had been taken on the day I had last flown my drone there, the day I had discovered the "I see you" message on the roof. He had been there, but he had not been in the plant. He had been in the sky, high above me, watching me as I was watching the building. The entire power dynamic of our relationship, which I thought I had understood, was a complete fiction. I had believed I was the eye in the sky, the powerful, unseen observer, but I had been the one under surveillance the entire time. He had been watching me from an even greater height, a higher, more dominant position. My drone flights had not been a solitary exploration. They had been a shared activity, his drone silently shadowing mine. The photograph was a masterpiece of intimidation. It was a clear, undeniable statement of his superior skill and reach. It told me that he had his own drone, likely a more powerful, more sophisticated model than my own. It told me that he had tracked me from the plant, had followed me to my car. It told me that while I was busy feeling like a trespasser, I was actually the one being cased. My flimsy defenses, my blackout curtains, my grounded drone, they were all a pathetic joke. I had been trying to block his view from my window, a strategy based on the flawed assumption that he needed to be close. But he didn't need to be close. He could watch me from 1,000 feet in the sky. I could hide in my dark apartment for the rest of my life, but he could still watch my building, my car, my comings and goings. The feeling of being outmaneuvered was absolute. This was a game of chess, and he was a grandmaster, while I was a novice who had only just learned how the pieces move. Every move I made, he was already 3 steps ahead. He had let me think I was in control, had let me have my small victories, all the while knowing he held this devastating piece of evidence, this proof of his total dominance. I stared at the photograph on my screen. My own car, a tiny, vulnerable object in a vast, indifferent landscape. The clarity was astonishing. I could make out the small dent on my passenger side door, the pattern of the pine needles on the roof. This was not a cheap hobbyist drone. This was a professional piece of equipment with a powerful zoom lens and a high-resolution camera. My Icarus, which I had once thought so advanced, was a child's toy compared to this. My mind reeled with a new, more terrifying thought. If he could take a picture this clear of my car from a great height, then he could have easily followed me home that day. Not on the street, but in the sky, a silent, unseen satellite tracking my every move. He could have hovered high above my apartment building, marking my location, learning my address. The drone at my window hadn't been a search. It had been a confirmation. He already knew where I was. The blackout curtains, my proud fortress wall, now seemed like a pathetic, foolish gesture. I had been trying to stop a man from peering through my window, when he had the power to look down on my entire life from the heavens. My sense of scale was all wrong. I had been thinking about a man on the ground, a threat that was horizontal, but his threat was vertical. It came from above, a place I could never hope to defend. This was a statement of technological superiority. He was showing me that his eye was sharper than mine, his reach longer, his position higher. He was not just a fellow player, he was a better one. He was demonstrating, with a single stunning photograph, that I was completely and utterly outmatched. The game was rigged, and the board was tilted entirely in his favor. I had brought a simple camera to a war of satellite surveillance. The photograph was not just a threat, it was a lesson. He was teaching me the true nature of his power. He was showing me the foolishness of my own defenses. The message was clear. You can hide in your dark room. You can ground your little toy drone. But you cannot hide from me. I own the sky above you. I can see everything. The psychological blow was as powerful as any physical one. I felt a profound sense of digital nakedness. My life, my movements, my location, they were all just data points to him, easily collected and analyzed. He had turned the entire world into his personal surveillance state, and I was its sole, unwilling citizen. The feeling was one of absolute impotence. I was a character in a video game, and he was the player with the cheat codes, the one who could see the entire map at once. I closed my laptop, but I couldn't close out the image. My car, so small, so vulnerable, surrounded by the vast, dark woods. It was a perfect metaphor for my own situation. I was a tiny, isolated target in a world that was suddenly filled with an unseen, all-seeing threat. My home was not a bunker. It was just a slightly more decorated box than my car, and just as easy for him to find. The nature of the game had changed once more. It was no longer about a strange message or a creepy feeling. It was about a demonstrable technological power that I could not hope to compete with. He had proven his capabilities. And now that he had shown me what he could do, my mind was filled with the terrifying question of what he would do next. The photograph of my car felt like a prelude to something much worse. I spent the rest of the day in my darkened apartment, my eyes constantly, nervously, drifting upwards, towards the ceiling, as if I could somehow sense his presence in the sky above. The open air, the sky itself, had become hostile territory. I felt like a creature being stalked by a hawk, my every move exposed, my every hiding place useless. There was no defense against an enemy who could watch you from a place you could never see. He had not just followed me. He had escalated the game to a level where I could no longer even pretend to compete. He had shown me his eye, and his eye was everywhere. My small, contained world had been violently and completely breached, not by a man at my door, but by a ghost in the sky, a silent, patient observer who had just proven that my life was an open book to him. The photograph of my car was a turning point. The threat was no longer abstract or deniable. It was a high-resolution image, a piece of concrete, digital evidence. The helplessness I felt was now mingled with a new, frantic urgency. I could not fight him in the sky, but perhaps I could fight him on the ground. I had proof now, something tangible to show people. I refused to believe that the world would remain indifferent in the face of such clear, undeniable evidence of my stalking. Decided to try my friends again, this time armed with the photograph. I called my closest friend, a sharp, pragmatic woman named Sarah. I didn't tell her the story over the phone. I needed her to see the image, to understand the quality, the impossible angle. I invited her over, my voice tight with a forced calmness, pretending I just wanted to catch up. I needed to see her reaction in person. I needed a witness to my reality. She arrived that evening, a bottle of wine in her hand, her presence a welcome slice of normalcy in my shuttered, darkened apartment. We made small talk for a few minutes, but I couldn't keep up the charade. I took a deep breath and opened my laptop, the screen illuminating the dim room. "Sarah," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I need to show you something. I need you to look at this with an open mind and just believe me." I opened the email from the anonymous sender and clicked on the link. The web page loaded, and the aerial photograph of my car filled the screen. I watched Sarah's face as she leaned in to look, her brow furrowed. "Wow," she said, her voice a mixture of confusion and intrigue. "Where did you get this? Is this from your drone? The quality is amazing." She was seeing it as a piece of photography, not as a piece of evidence. "It's not from my drone," I said, my voice low and urgent. "It was sent to me, anonymously. Sarah, that's my car, parked outside the Sterling power plant last week. Someone else took this picture, from another drone, high above me, while I was there. This is the man I told you about. He's not just a feeling anymore. He's real, and he's watching me." I laid it all out for her, my voice shaking with the gravity of it all. Sarah stared at the screen for a long time, her whine forgotten. "Okay, that is officially creepy on a whole new level," she admitted, shaking her head. "But Chloe, are you sure? I mean, couldn't it be something else? Like, isn't this the kind of thing those satellite map sites do? Maybe they just updated their imagery and some internet troll found it and sent it to you as a prank." She was searching, just as I had, for a less terrifying explanation. "A prank?" I asked, my voice rising. "How would they know my email address? How would they know I was there at that exact time? And why would they paint 'I see you' on the roof, for only me to find?" I felt the familiar frustration of trying to explain a pattern to someone who was only seeing a single strange data point. She couldn't see the whole picture, because it was too monstrous to look at. "I don't know," she conceded. "But a secret, high-tech drone stalker who has a personal vendetta against you seems a little far-fetched, doesn't it? It just feels like there has to be a simpler explanation." She looked at me with that same pitying concern I had seen in my sister's eyes in my previous life. It was the look you give a friend who is brilliant and creative, but perhaps a little too prone to seeing conspiracies in the shadows. Her skepticism was a physical blow. I had come to her with my one piece of undeniable proof, and even now, she was trying to explain it away. The world's resistance to my reality was stronger than any evidence I could present. The story was too strange, too much like a movie, to be true. It was easier for her to believe in a complex, global prank than it was to believe in the simple, terrifying truth that a man was methodically tormenting her friend. I tried to argue further, to make her see the pattern, but I could feel her pulling away, retreating into the safe, logical world where things like this didn't happen. The conversation ended with her suggesting I should still go to the police with this new evidence, but her tone was not hopeful. It was the tone of someone suggesting a course of action they know will be fruitless, simply to placate a distraught friend. After Sarah left, her parting hug feeling more like a gesture of condolence for my sanity than one of solidarity, I felt a new kind of despair. It was the despair of being misunderstood. I had presented my best, most concrete piece of evidence, and it had been rationalized away into a prank, a coincidence. I realized then that my reality was a story so unbelievable that even those who cared for me could not bring themselves to enter it. They stood on the safe shores of logic, while I was drowning alone in a sea of impossible proof. But her suggestion to go to the police, however half-hearted, stuck in my mind. Maybe she was right. maybe a photograph, an actual image, was different. It was not a feeling or a sound. It was a piece of data. It was something they could see, something they could file. My previous report had been about a feeling and a sound. This time, I had a link. I had a photograph. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had left. The next day, I went back to the police precinct. I felt a humiliating sense of déjà vu as I sat across from a new, equally weary-looking officer. I explained my situation again, this time trying to be as concise and as factual as possible. I told him I had new evidence. I opened my laptop, my heart pounding, and navigated to the anonymous email. The person harassing me sent me this link, I explained. It leads to an aerial photograph he took of my car. The officer leaned forward, a flicker of professional interest in his eyes. This was something he could understand. A link, an image, a piece of digital evidence. "Okay," he said. "Let's see it." I felt a surge of triumphant hope. Finally, someone was about to see the proof. Someone was about to believe me. With a confidence I had not felt in weeks, I moved the cursor over the blue hyperlink and clicked. The browser opened a new tab. The page began to load, and then the screen resolved into a stark, simple message, written in a generic black font. 404 error. Page not found. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. I clicked the refresh button. 404 error. Page not found. I went back to my email and clicked the link again. The same result. The link was dead. The photograph was gone. "It was there last night," I stammered, my voice a pathetic, weak whisper. "I swear it was a photograph of my car. He must have taken it down. He knew I would come here." I looked up, at the officer, my face a mask of desperate, pleading horror. I could see the flicker of interest in his eyes die, replaced by the familiar, tired look of profound skepticism. The ghost had erased his own footprints. The rest of the encounter was a humiliating blur. The officer was polite, but his disbelief was a palpable presence in the room. He took down the dead link, a useless piece of information. He filed a supplementary report to my original complaint, but I knew what he was thinking. A stressed-out woman, a dead link, a story about a phantom drone pilot. I was no longer a victim reporting a crime. I was a mentally unstable person wasting his time. I walked out of that police station completely and utterly broken. He had outmaneuvered me again, but this time it was a masterstroke of psychological cruelty. He hadn't just shown me his power. He had given me a piece of proof, a lifeline of hope, and had then snatched it away at the very moment I tried to use it. He had made me look like a liar, a fool, a madwoman. He had not just discredited my story, he had discredited my sanity. My isolation was now absolute. There was no one left. My friends thought I was stressed. The police thought I was delusional. I had no proof, no evidence, nothing but a story that now sounded even more unhinged than before. The antagonist was not just a stalker. He was a brilliant, invisible stage manager, perfectly controlling the narrative, ensuring that I was the only one who would ever see the full, terrifying truth of his performance. I went home and drew my blackout curtains, the darkness a welcome comfort. The world outside no longer believed me, so I would shut it out completely. It was just me and him now. He had successfully severed all my ties to the world of reason and logic. I was alone on my island of terror, and he was the unseen god of that island, able to conjure evidence and then make it vanish at will. and I knew his next revelation would be designed to make me feel even more helpless. My life after the dead link was a period of quiet, hollow resignation. I went to work, I came home, I existed within the perpetual twilight of my shuttered apartment. I had given up. There was no one to convince, no one to help. The world outside had rendered its judgment, and I was left to navigate my private nightmare alone. I deleted his emails without opening them, a small, futile act of defiance that brought me no comfort. I lived in a state of constant, low-grade dread, waiting for the next move in his silent game. The fear became a part of the architecture of my life. It was in the drawn blinds, the double-checked locks, the way I would flinch at the sound of a passing car. I had stopped expecting to feel safe. My new goal was simply to endure, to survive his psychological siege without completely losing my mind. The silence from him, the lack of new emails for over a week, was not a comfort. It was a suspense, a long, drawn-out pause that promised a more terrifying crescendo. One Saturday, I decided I could not spend another full day in the darkness of my apartment. The small backyard, a tiny patch of grass and weeds enclosed by a high wooden fence, had been my one project before all this began. I had wanted to plant a garden. I decided, in a small act of rebellion against my own fear, that I would do it. It was my yard. It was private. It was a space on the ground, shielded by fences. Here, at least, I could be safe. I spent the morning outside, the pale sun warm on my face. The simple physical act of pulling weeds, of turning over the soil, was a powerful therapy. For a few hours, I felt almost normal. I was just a woman in her garden, my hands in the dirt, the world reduced to the simple, honest work of making something grow. The sky above was a vast, empty blue. I refused to look up. I would not grant him that power over me here. I felt a flicker of the peace I had once known. This was my space, a small, enclosed, private patch of earth. His domain was the sky, the distant, abandoned places. He had no power here. I was grounded, connected to the earth. The feeling was a fragile one, but I clung to it desperately. This small act of gardening felt like a reclamation of a tiny corner of my own life, a single square foot of territory I was taking back from him. That evening, I felt a rare sense of accomplishment. I had faced my fear, and had spent a day outside, and nothing had happened. Perhaps this was the answer: to live a grounded life, to stay out of the sky, to focus on the small, tangible things in front of me. Maybe if I made my world small enough, I could make myself invisible to his all-seeing, eye in the sky. It was a new, desperate hope. The email arrived just as I was getting ready for bed. It was him. The same anonymous encrypted address, the same blank subject line. My brief, fragile peace shattered instantly. He had been watching. He had seen my small act of defiance, my attempt to reclaim a piece of my life. And he was now here to remind me that there was no space, no matter how small or how private, that he could not reach. I stared at the new message in my inbox, my heart pounding, a slow, heavy rhythm of dread. I knew what it was. It was a response to my day in the garden. It was his way of telling me that my efforts were futile. With a sense of faded, weary resignation, I opened the email. As before, it was empty, save for a single blue hyperlink. I knew I shouldn't click it, but I also knew I had to. I had to see the proof of my own violation. The web page loaded. A single photograph appeared. It was an aerial shot, just like the one of my car, taken from a great height, looking straight down. But the subject was not my car. It was my backyard, my small, private, fence-enclosed yard. And there, in the center of the image, was a small figure, kneeling in the dirt, her hands covered in soil. It was me. He had photographed me in my own backyard, my last safe space, the one place on earth I believed I was shielded from his view. He had been up there, high in the sky, his drone a silent, invisible speck, watching me as I gardened. He had watched me try to reclaim my life, and he had documented my failure with a single devastating click of his camera. The fences, the walls, they were all meaningless. I stared at the image of myself, a tiny, vulnerable figure in my own captured sanctuary. The high wooden fence that had given me such a profound sense of privacy was just a small, insignificant square from his perspective. My pathetic attempt to create a safe, grounded space had been observed, documented, and returned to me as a piece of evidence in the case against my own freedom. He was showing me that there was no wall high enough to keep his gaze out. The intimacy of this new violation was breathtaking. He had not just followed me home. He was now actively surveilling my home. He was watching me in my moments of leisure, in the place where I was supposed to be able to let my guard down completely. The photo was a clear message. I am not just at the power plant. I am not just on your street. I am above your home. I'm always above you. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a target. It was a location on his map, a place he could visit with his remote eye whenever he chose. I felt a profound sense of being trapped, not just in my apartment, but in my own life. Every step I took outside, whether to go to work or to simply get the mail, would now be fraught with the terrifying possibility that he was up there, a silent, invisible speck in the blue sky, watching me. I slammed my laptop shut, a useless, violent gesture against a threat that was everywhere and nowhere at once. The image was gone from my screen, but it was seared into my brain, the image of myself, so blissfully unaware, so pathetically hopeful, digging in the dirt while he watched me from above. He had not just taken a picture. He had captured my last moment of peace and had turned it into a weapon. The despair was a physical thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket that settled over me. There were no more defenses to build. There were no more routines to change. I had tried hiding in the darkness of my apartment, and he had sent me proof he knew where I was. I had tried finding solace in the light of my own backyard, and he had sent me proof he could see me there too. There was no escape. He had won. The psychological game was over. He had proven his complete and utter dominance. He could see me at work. He could see me at home. He could see me indoors and out. He had access to my digital life and my physical life. I was a fish in a glass bowl, and he could peer in from any angle he chose, whenever he wanted. My life was no longer my own. It was a live feed, and he was the only viewer. I thought about the dead link to the previous photograph. I knew this one would disappear as well. It was his method. He would show me the proof of his power, allow it to terrorize me, and then erase it, leaving me with nothing but my own frantic, unbelievable story. He was a perfect ghost, a master of leaving behind only psychological scars, not physical evidence. He was untouchable. I sat in my darkened living room, the blinds still drawn, and I felt nothing but a profound, hollow emptiness. The rage was gone. The desire to fight was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard certainty of my own powerlessness. I was the subject of a relentless, sophisticated, and completely untraceable campaign of terror, and I had absolutely no way to make it stop. The second act of his terrible play had ended with this final crushing blow. He had isolated me from the world, and now he had shown me that there was no corner of that world, not even my own small, fenced-in yard, where I could hide from him. He had stripped me of everything: my peace, my hobby, my sense of safety, and finally my last shred of hope. And in the depths of that despair, I was left with a single terrifying thought. He had watched me at work. He had watched me at home. He had proven he could see me anywhere, anytime. The game of observation was over, because he had so completely won it. So what came next? What happens when the watcher, the observer, the collector of moments finally decides he is tired of watching from a distance and wants to see his collection up close? The photograph of my garden was his final mistake. He had intended it to be his ultimate victory, the move that would shatter my last reserves of hope and leave me a whimpering, paranoid wreck. And for a full day, it worked. I was a ghost in my own shuttered home, paralyzed by a despair so profound it felt like a physical death. I had been completely, utterly beaten. But something happens when you hit the absolute bottom. There's nowhere left to go but up. On the second day after the photograph, I woke up, and something inside me had changed. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. But it was no longer the dominant emotion. It had been joined and then overtaken by a pure, incandescent rage. A rage so clean and so powerful it burned away the fog of my despair. He had taken my hobby, my peace, my home. I was not going to let him take my life. I would not run. I would not hide. I would not live in a perpetual state of twilight, cowering behind my own curtains. He had turned the sky into my prison, so I would have to reclaim the sky. The decision was not a rational one. It was a primal, instinctual response. A cornered animal will do one of two things. It will either lie down and die, or it will turn and fight with a ferocity it never knew it possessed. My time for lying down was over. My mind, once a maelstrom of fear, now became a quiet, focused workshop of war. He was a drone pilot. So was I. He had used his technology to hunt me. I would use my technology to hunt him. The game of cat and mouse was over. It was about to become a battle between two predators, two observers, and I would use his own arrogance, his own confidence in my passivity, as my greatest weapon. My drone, my beautiful Icarus, had been sitting in its case in my closet, a symbol of my fear and my abandoned passion. I took it out, my hands steady. It no longer felt like a contaminated object. It felt like a weapon, a tool, my tool. I charged its batteries, I cleaned its lenses, I updated its firmware. I was preparing my soldier for battle, my eye in the sky for a new, more dangerous mission. My plan began to form, a desperate, dangerous strategy. He was watching me. I knew that. So I would have to use that to my advantage. I would have to use my own drone as bait. I would fly again, but not at the power plant. I would fly in a new location, a large open park with a mix of fields and woods, a place that would force him to get closer if he wanted to maintain a clear line of sight, a place with opportunities for me to hide. I would not be flying to take pictures. I would be flying to see him. My objective was simple: to get footage of his drone. If I could get a clear image of his machine, I might be able to identify it. Custom drones often have specific parts, specific configurations. If I could identify his drone, I might be able to trace the parts, to find him on a form, to get a clue to his identity. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. This was no longer about defending myself. This was about gathering intelligence. This was about turning the tables, about making him the one who was being surveilled, being documented. I would use my own flight as a lure, and while he was focused on watching me on his screen, I would be searching the skies for him, for the telltale shape of his own machine. I was going to hunt his eye in the sky. The fear was still there, of course. The thought of willingly putting myself back in his line of sight was terrifying. But my rage was stronger. The desire to fight back, to reclaim my life, was a more powerful motivator than the fear that had kept me a prisoner. I was done being the subject of his art. I was going to become the author of his downfall. I spent the next day preparing, planning my flight path, studying maps of the park I had chosen. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The Huntress inside me, the focused, determined woman who had once tracked down abandoned buildings, was now tracking a much more dangerous prey. I was no longer a victim. I was an opponent. And I was about to make my first move. I chose my new hunting ground with care. It was a large state park about an hour's drive from the city, a place called Eagle's Peak. It was a landscape of rolling hills, dense forests, and wide open meadows. This varied terrain was crucial. It would give me places to hide my own drone while forcing him to expose his, if he wanted to maintain a clear line of sight on my Icarus. I was designing the battlefield to suit my own tactical needs. The night before my planned flight, I felt a strange calm. I wasn't sleeping, but I wasn't pacing in terror either. I was methodically preparing my gear, a soldier polishing her armor before the final battle. I updated my drone's software, not for new features, but to ensure it was as responsive and as fast as it could possibly be. I packed extra batteries, extra propellers. I was preparing for a long and difficult flight, a dogfight in the sky. This was no longer about photography. I didn't care about capturing beautiful images of decay. My camera was no longer a tool for art. It was a tool for reconnaissance. Its high-resolution lens would not be focused on rusting metal, but on the sleek, dark shape of his machine. I was repurposing my passion, twisting it into a weapon, just as he had done to me. The symmetry of it was a cold, bitter comfort. I decided to fly not at dawn, but in the late afternoon. The long shadows of the setting sun would provide more cover for him, yes, but also for me. It was a risk, but I wanted him to feel comfortable, to believe I was just a normal hobbyist out for a golden hour flight. I needed him to lower his guard, to get cocky, to get close. My entire plan depended on his arrogance, his belief that I was still just the frightened prey. The drive to Eagle's Peak was a silent, focused journey. I didn't listen to music. I just listened to the sound of my own steady breathing, my own calm heartbeat. The fear was there, a cold passenger in the seat beside me, but I refused to give it the wheel. My rage, my determination, my profound and desperate need to end this, that was what was driving me now. I was a woman on a mission, and failure was not an option. I parked in a small, deserted lot at the edge of the park. As I assembled my drone, my hands were steady. I went through my pre-flight checklist with a clinical precision. Everything had to be perfect. One mistake, one miscalculation, and I would lose my only chance. This was not just a flight. It was an interrogation. and my drone was the only question I knew how to ask. I was ready for his answer. I launched Icarus into the sky, the familiar, high-pitched buzz a comforting sound. I sent it soaring over the treetops, its camera feeding me a beautiful panoramic view of the park. For a moment, the old familiar joy of flying returned, the feeling of freedom, of seeing the world from a god's eye view. But it was quickly replaced by the cold, hard focus of my mission. I was not here to admire the view. I was here to hunt. Began a series of slow, lazy passes over a large open meadow, a flight path that was deliberately obvious and non-threatening. I was making myself visible, a bright, tempting target in the sky. I was casting my line into the vast, blue ocean of the air, and I was waiting for a bite. I panned my camera around, scanning the horizon, searching the treetops, looking for any sign of him. Then, on the edge of my screen, I saw a flicker of movement. It was fast, dark, and high above me. My heart leaped. It was a drone. His drone. A sleek, black, custom-built machine, moving with a speed and agility that far surpassed my own. It was hovering at the edge of the tree line, watching me, just as I knew it would be. He had taken the bait. He was here. A cold smile touched my lips. The game was on. I turned my drone to face his. A silent challenge issued across 1,000 feet of empty air. I was no longer the frightened woman in the apartment. I was no longer the terrified runner in the park. I was a pilot, an observer, a huntress. And I was finally meeting my opponent on a field of battle where we were equals. The aerial confrontation was a silent, high-stakes ballet. He was a master pilot, his drone moving with a predatory grace that far outmatched my own. It was a sleek black machine, clearly a custom build, with a powerful gimbal-mounted camera that seemed to track my own drone's every move. He danced at the edge of my flight range, a dark, menacing hornet in the golden afternoon light. But I was not trying to outfly him. I was trying to outthink him. My objective was singular. Get clear footage. I abandoned all attempts at aesthetic photography and became a pure documentarian. I pushed my camera's zoom to its limit, the image becoming slightly grainy, and I focused on tracking his drone. It was a difficult, disorienting task, trying to follow a fast-moving object with my own. But my rage and adrenaline gave me a preternatural focus. I would not lose him. He played with me for several minutes, leading my drone on a chase through the treetops, over the open meadows. It was a display of dominance, a demonstration of his superior skill. He would let me get close, let me almost frame him perfectly, and then he would perform a sudden, impossibly sharp maneuver, leaving my own drone struggling to keep up. He was showing me that he was the better pilot, the superior observer. But his arrogance was his weakness. In his desire to show off, to intimidate me with his skill, he gave me exactly what I needed. He performed a slow, banking turn, allowing me a perfect, prolonged view of the side of his machine. I held my drone as steady as I could, the camera locked on him, recording every detail in high-resolution video. I captured the specific configuration of his rotors, the make of his gimbal, the unique, custom-built chassis. I had it. As if he knew I had gotten what I wanted, he broke off the engagement. His drone ascended with a startling vertical speed, and then shot off towards the horizon, disappearing over the distant tree line before I could even attempt to follow. He was gone. The sky was empty again, except for my own small drone, hovering in the quiet air. I was left with a racing heart and a memory card full of my only evidence. I landed Icarus quickly, my hands trembling with the aftermath of the adrenaline. I had done it. I had faced him. I had held my ground, and I had captured the proof I needed. It was a small, partial victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer just the subject of his surveillance. I was now an investigator with a solid, tangible lead. The drive home was a blur of triumphant, nervous energy. I couldn't wait to get back to my computer, to analyze the footage, to begin the next phase of my hunt. The fear was still there, a cold undercurrent beneath the elation, but it was a different kind of fear now. It was the fear of a hunter who knows her prey is dangerous, not the fear of a victim who doesn't know where the next attack will come from. Back in my apartment, I uploaded the video file to my computer. I watched the aerial dogfight again, this time with the cold, analytical eye of a researcher. I paused on the clearest frames of his drone, taking high-resolution screenshots of its every angle. It was a beautiful machine, I had to admit. A custom-built, long-range observation drone designed for speed, stability, and stealth. It was the work of a serious, dedicated, and obsessive builder. My investigation began. I took the screenshots of the various components, the specific type of carbon fiber arms, the unusual motor configuration, the high-end camera gimbal, and I started searching. I plunged into the niche, obsessive world of custom drone builders, a world of online forums, specialty parts suppliers, and YouTube tutorials. I was searching for a needle in a digital haystack, but I had a clear image of the needle. After hours of searching, I found it. It was on a small, obscure forum for long-range FPV, first-person view, pilots. A user had posted a series of detailed photographs of their new custom build, asking for advice on a particular flight controller issue. The drone in the photographs was an exact match for the one I had seen in the sky. The same chassis, the same motors, the same gimbal. It was his drone, and the user who had posted it had a username. Observer 7. Observer 7. The username was a chilling confirmation. It was him. I felt a surge of triumph, my heart pounding in my chest. I had found him. I had found his digital ghost. I clicked on his profile and began to systematically read every single post he had ever made on the forum. I was no longer just an investigator. I was an archaeologist, digging through the digital ruins of his obsessive, paranoid mind. His posts were a disturbing mixture of technical expertise and a strange territorial philosophy. He wrote about his drone as a tool for reclaiming sovereignty. He spoke of the abandoned places he flew over not as empty ruins, but as his territories, his preserves. He was obsessed with the idea of being the sole, unseen watcher of these forgotten spaces. He saw himself as their silent, solitary guardian, and any other drone was an intruder in his kingdom. Then I found the post that made my blood run cold. It was from 2 weeks ago, shortly after my first flight, where I had seen the face in the window. Had a trespasser at the Sterling complex today. He had written, "Another observer. They think they are unseen, but the eye in the sky sees all. They are careless. They have a routine. The observation has begun." I was reading a log of his own hunt for me. He had been documenting his stalking from the very beginning. His older posts revealed more. He spoke of protecting the silence, of these places, of scaring off vandals and other explorers. He saw himself as a righteous protector, a curator of decay. And his methods were always the same: remote, psychological intimidation. He wrote about leaving messages for intruders, about asserting his observational dominance. The message, on the roof, the drone at my window. They were just his standard operating procedure. I was not special. I was just the latest trespasser. In the signature of his forum posts was a link to an old, long-dormant blog. The blog was a collection of his own aerial photographs, beautiful, haunting images of abandoned places, many of which I recognized, and on the About Me page, I found his name. His name was Jacob, and he was a former security consultant who had been fired for his overly aggressive, invasive surveillance tactics against his own company's employees. The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. He was an expert in surveillance. He had lost his job, his professional outlet for his obsession, and had transferred that obsession to these abandoned places. He had appointed himself the guardian of these ruins, and my hobby, my passion, had been seen as a direct challenge to his authority, an invasion of his self-proclaimed territory. This was not a random stalking. This was a turf war. He wasn't trying to hurt me, not in the physical sense. He was trying to drive me away. He was trying to break me psychologically, to make me too afraid to ever return to his spaces. The photo of my car, the photo of my garden, they were not just threats. They were proofs of his capability, warnings that his surveillance was not limited to the plant, that he could reach me anywhere if I continued to trespass on his domain. I now understood everything. The man, his motives, his methods. He was a king ruling over a kingdom of rust and decay, and I had been an unwitting peasant who had strayed into the royal forest. His terrifying campaign was, in his own twisted mind, a justified and proportional response to my intrusion. I had violated his solitude, and he, in turn, had systematically dismantled mine. But this knowledge did not bring me peace. It brought a new, more profound fear. I was dealing with a man who had a righteous, philosophical justification for his actions. He was not just a creep. He was a zealot. A man who believed he was in the right. And a man like that, a man on a mission, is he the most dangerous kind of enemy? He would not stop until he was sure his territory was secure again. I had his name. I had his face. I had his story. I had enough evidence to go to the police and have them finally take me seriously. But I also knew, with a chilling certainty, that it wouldn't be that simple. He was an expert in this game. He would have contingencies. And as I sat there, staring at his name on the screen, I knew that this was far from over. I had found him, yes, but he had known where I was all along, and the final confrontation was yet to come. The knowledge I had gained was a heavy, dangerous thing. I had his name, Jacob. I had his face. I had his history. I had a complete, detailed profile of the man who had been systematically terrorizing me. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer a frightened victim reacting to his moves. I was now an investigator holding a dossier full of damning evidence. The question was no longer what he would do next, but what I would do with what I knew. My first instinct was to go to the police immediately. I had everything they needed. A clear image of his face, his name, a documented history of his obsessive behavior, and a motive that, while bizarre, was at least human and understandable. This was no longer a story about a ghost. It was a story about a man named Jacob, a man who could be found, a man who could be stopped. My path forward was clear. But as I began to gather my evidence, a new cold fear began to creep in. He was still watching me. He had proven his ability to monitor me at home. If I were to simply get in my car and drive to the police station, he would know. His drone would be in the sky above me in minutes, tracking my every move. He would know exactly where I was going. And a man like that, a man so obsessed with control, would not simply allow himself to be caught. He would disappear. He would scrub his online profiles, pack up his drones, and vanish back into the shadows from which he had emerged. The police would find an empty house, a dead end, and I would be left with the horrifying knowledge that I had shown my hand, and he had escaped, free to continue his game with me or with someone else at a time of his choosing. I could not risk letting him get away. I needed to be smarter. I needed a diversion, a final piece of misdirection to make him believe that I was still just the foolish, predictable photographer, unaware of his true identity. I needed to make him think I was still playing the old game, while I was actually making my final move in a new one. I would use my own drone, my Icarus, one last time. Not as a tool for hunting, but as a decoy. A final, beautiful lie. My plan was simple. I would go back to Eagles Peak Park, the scene of our last encounter. I would launch my drone and set it on a long, pre-programmed flight path, a series of lazy, sweeping circles over the meadows. It would be a flight that looked like my old ones, artistic, aimless, observational. It would be a flight designed to capture his full attention, to make him believe I was back to my old foolish habits. While my drone was flying its beautiful, automated lie, and while he, in turn, was watching it, I would be somewhere else entirely. I would be in my car, driving in the opposite direction, towards the city, towards the police station. It was a race against his attention span. I was betting that his obsession with monitoring the sky above his territory would be strong enough to blind him to my movements on the ground. It was the most dangerous gambit of my life. It required me to go back out into the open, to make myself vulnerable one last time. But it was the only way. I had to create a believable performance to mask my true intentions. I had to become the observer again, just for a little while, so that he would not see me transforming into the accuser. The final act of this play would be a masterpiece of deception. I drove to the park, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind a cold, clear machine. The fear was a distant hum, a background noise that I refused to listen to. My focus was absolute. I arrived at the park, set up my drone, and launched it into the sky. I programmed the flight path, a long, looping, hour-long journey over the quiet landscape. I watched as Icarus ascended, a graceful, silent bird beginning its final, crucial performance. I left the controller on the ground next to my empty car, the screen showing the drone's placid, beautiful view. It was a perfect piece of stagecraft. And then, I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away. I did not look at the sky. I did not look for his drone. I just drove, my eyes fixed, on the road ahead, on the path that led to the police, to the end of this nightmare. My decoy was in the air. The Huntress was making her escape. The 40-minute drive to the city felt like a lifetime. Every minute that passed was a minute he could discover my ruse. I imagined him, watching the lazy, repetitive flight of my drone on his screen, his brow slowly furrowing with suspicion. Was the flight path too perfect? Too robotic? Would he realize it was a pre-programmed route? A lie designed to keep his eyes fixed on the sky while I was on the ground, driving towards his destruction? My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I walked into the police precinct for the third and final time. But this time, I was not a frightened woman with an unbelievable story. I was an investigator, and I had a case file. I asked to speak with the detective who had taken my last report, and I calmly, coolly, laid a folder on his desk. It contained everything. The high-resolution screenshot of Jacob's face, his name, the printouts from the drone forum, his posts about his territories, and observing the observers. The entire horrifying story. The detective stared at the file, his cynical expression slowly melting away, replaced by one of shocked, dawning belief. This was not a story about a feeling. This was a documented case of obsessive, technologically advanced stalking, complete with a named suspect and a history. He saw the pattern. He saw the evidence. He saw the threat. For the first time, I was not being dismissed. I was being believed, and the relief was so profound it almost brought me to my knees. A plan was quickly formulated. They would not call him, not warn him. They would go to his property, the one I had identified from the clues on his blog, and they would apprehend him. My drone was still in the air, my beautiful decoy, and its last act would be to keep him distracted while the real world finally, belatedly, came to his door. I had done it. I had delivered the ghost into the hands of the authorities. The final confrontation, however, was not one I was allowed to witness. The police went to his isolated property near the power plant, a small rundown house surrounded by a thicket of woods. They found the drone controller, still active, showing the feed from his drone as it watched my own Icarus circling in the sky. But of Jacob, there was no sign. He had a network of cameras around his own property. He had seen them coming, and he had vanished. They found his workshop in an old barn. It was filled with drone parts, high-powered antennas, and monitors. On one wall was a map, with the Sterling power plant circled in red. On another wall were photographs. Dozens of them. Aerial shots of other people, other cars, other drone pilots who had dared to enter his territory. I was not his first project. I was just the one who had fought back. He had an escape tunnel dug out from the back of the barn. He was gone. I never returned to my old apartment. I couldn't. I sold it, and I sold my drone, my beautiful Icarus. The passion was gone, replaced by a deep and abiding fear of the open sky. My hobby, my art, my one true source of freedom, had been permanently tainted. He had not been caught, but he had won in the end. He had successfully driven me from his territory, and from my own life's greatest joy. I live in a different city, now, in a tall apartment building in the heart of downtown. I chose it because it is surrounded by other tall buildings, a canyon of concrete and glass that obstructs the view of the sky. I work in a different field, something indoors, away from windows. I have tried to make myself as small, as grounded, as unobservable as possible. I have tried to disappear into the noise of the city. I tell myself that he has forgotten me. I was a trespasser he successfully repelled. He has his kingdom of decay back, and he is likely watching over it now. A silent, obsessive guardian. My part in his story is over. He has no reason to seek me out. No reason to continue the game. I am no longer a player. I have to believe this to get through the day. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when I'm walking home from the subway, I find my eyes drifting upwards, scanning the slivers of dark sky between the buildings. and I listen. I listen for a sound that no one else would ever notice. A sound that is now a permanent part of my own internal landscape. A faint, high-pitched electronic whine. A familiar, terrible buzz. And last night, I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible hum, high above the city streets. A sound that could have been anything. But I know what it was. He has a new territory now. It's me.